Welcome to the Party's channel. Today, we explain Prophets Kings 1, chapter 16 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're embarking on this incredible, detailed journey through a deeply turbulent era in the northern kingdom of Israel. We're going to be walking verse by verse through the entire chapter, looking at a period that covers 5 different kings in rapid-fire succession. It's a dense, it's a thrilling, and honestly, a pretty violent historical record. We're talking assassinations, remarkably short reigns, and this escalating abandonment of divine commandments. It's a heavy chapter for sure, but we're going to break down every single detail together so you walk away with a complete understanding of this pivotal history.
Now, to make sure we keep things clear, grounded, and totally focused on learning, we're approaching this chapter strictly through the Peshat method. So, what does that actually mean? Well, Peshat refers directly to the plain text in its historical and literary context. It's the literal, straightforward meaning of the text exactly as it's been handed down to us through the generations. This means we aren't going to be diving into Kabbalah, Sod, or any deep symbolic interpretations today. Instead, we're keeping things simple and direct. We'll focus strictly on the literal sequence of events, making sure we really understand the who, the what, the where, and the why exactly as the ancient text presents it to us, verse by verse.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the cycle of kings. Second, Baasha and Elah's fall. Third, Zimri's 7 days. Fourth, Omri takes the throne. Fifth, Ahab's reign of ruin. And finally, some practical life lessons. Part 1. The Cycle of Kings. Okay, let's dive into this. Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is the absolute violent escalation that defines this era. Within the 34 verses of this single chapter, we are tracking an astounding turnover of leadership. We go from Baasha to his son Elah, who only manages to hold on to the throne for 2 short years. Then the kingdom fractures so violently that the next king, Zimri, lasts for a mere 7 days. From the ashes of that week-long rule rises Omri, who actually manages to stabilize the kingdom politically over a 12-year reign, and that paves the way for his son Ahab to rule for 22 years. But, as we'll soon read, political stability absolutely does not equal moral righteousness. In fact, looking at these 5 rulers reveals a steep, tragic, and really unyielding moral decline for the nation of Israel.
Part 2. Baasha and Elah's fall.
So, the chapter opens up with verses 1 through 7, and it hits us immediately with a severe divine message. The word of the Lord comes through the prophet Jehu, the son of Hanani, and it's directed squarely at King Baasha. The prophet delivers a really harsh, really specific warning. God reminds Baasha, saying, "Look, I lifted you out of the dust and made you a ruler over the people of Israel." Right? Baasha came from nothing, yet God elevated him. But instead of leading righteously, Baasha just walked in the sinful ways of the previous king, Jeroboam, causing Israel to sin and provoking God's anger. And because of this, God declares he will utterly consume Baasha's house. The curse here is terrifyingly vivid. Dogs are going to eat those belonging to Baasha who die in the city, and the birds of the sky will feed on those who die in the country. Following this bleak prophecy, Baasha rests with his ancestors, he's buried in the capital of Tirzah, and he passes this doomed throne over to his son Elah. The text specifically notes that this prophecy came because of the evil Baasha did, and importantly, because he had aggressively destroyed the house of Jeroboam. Moving into verses 8 through 14, we see the precise, literal fulfillment of that dark prophecy. So, in the 26th year of Asa, who is the king of Judah, Elah, the son of Baasha, becomes king and reigns in Tirzah. And like we said, he only lasts 2 years. The text paints this incredibly vivid picture of his sudden downfall. Instead of actually leading his nation or commanding his troops, King Elah is back in the capital city, getting completely drunk in the home of a man named Arza, who is in charge of the palace. And while the king is intoxicated and totally vulnerable, a plot is brewing. Zimri, one of his own trusted servants who commands half of his chariots, turns against him. Zimri literally walks right into Arza's house, strikes Elah down, and murders him in the 27th year of King Asa. But Zimri doesn't just stop at the king. As soon as he seats himself on the throne, he systematically eliminates Baasha's entire family. He doesn't spare a single male, neither relative nor friend is left alive. The text explicitly reminds us here that this total destruction happened exactly in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken through the prophet Jehu. And why? All because of the worthless idols and the sins that Baasha and Elah used to provoke God.
Part 3. Zimri's 7 days.
Verses 15 and 16 describe exactly what happens next. In the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, Zimri reigned in Tirzah for exactly 7 days. You might be wondering why only a week. Well, the text gives us the exact military context. At the very moment Zimri launched his bloody coup back in the capital, the Israelite army was far away, encamped against Gibbethon, which was a Philistine town. When the soldiers in that military camp heard the news that Zimri had committed treason and actually murdered the king, they completely rejected him. Instead, that very same day, right there in the encampment, all the Israelites proclaimed their army commander, a man named Omri, as the new king over Israel.
Now verses 17 through 20 outline the swift, brutal response. Omri and all the Israelites withdraw from the Philistine town of Gibbethon and march directly back to Tirzah, where they lay siege to their own capital. The usurper Zimri is hopelessly trapped. When Zimri realizes that the city defenses have fallen and he's about to be captured, he makes a dramatic and fatal decision. He retreats into the heavily fortified citadel of the royal palace, intentionally sets the palace on fire around himself, and dies in the flames. The text provides the deep spiritual reasoning behind this gruesome end. It wasn't just bad luck. It happened because of the sins he had committed, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord and walking in the sinful ways of Jeroboam, causing Israel to sin. And incredibly, he managed to do all that even in his mere 7 days of influence.
Part 4. Omri takes the throne. Let's move on and see how he solidifies his power.
So the crucial point is, the death of Zimri does not immediately bring peace. In verses 21 through 28, we see the complex rise of Omri. The people of Israel are totally fractured. Half the nation follows a man named Tibni, son of Ganath, intending to make him king, while the other half follows Omri. So a civil war ensues. Eventually, Omri's followers prove stronger than Tibni's. Tibni dies, and Omri becomes the undisputed king in the 31st year of Asa. Now Omri rules for 12 years, spending his first 6 years reigning in Tirzah, but then he makes a historically massive move. For 2 talents of silver, which is a huge sum of money, he buys the hill of Samaria from a man named Shemer. Omri builds a brand new city on this hill and names it Samaria, establishing a new, permanent capital for the northern kingdom. However, despite his political strategy and architectural achievements, verses 25 and 26 deliver a damning spiritual verdict. Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord, sinning more than all those before him. He wholeheartedly walked in all the ways of Jeroboam, provoking the God of Israel with worthless idols. Omri dies, he is buried in his new capital of Samaria, and he passes the kingdom to his son, Ahab.
Part 5. Ahab's Reign of Ruin.
We now transition into verses 29 through 33, detailing the reign of Omri's son, King Ahab. If Omri was noted for sinning more than his predecessors, while Ahab manages to take the kingdom to historically darker places during his 22-year reign in Samaria. The text explicitly tells us that Ahab considered it trivial, almost like a light, insignificant thing, to merely commit the sins of Jeroboam. He actively escalated the idolatry, institutionalizing it right into the capital. How did he do it? By marrying Jezebel, the daughter of Ithbakal, king of the Sidonians. Under her influence, he didn't just casually tolerate foreign gods, he actively began to serve Baal and worship him. He went so far as to build a literal temple for Baal right there in Samaria and set up an altar inside it. He also made an Asherah pole. The text concludes with this devastating summary. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than did all the kings of Israel before him combined.
And to truly underscore the spiritual blindness of Ahab's era, the chapter closes in verse 34 with a really chilling historical footnote. During Ahab's time, a man named Hiel of Bethel decides to rebuild the city of Jericho. Now, generations earlier, after the walls of Jericho fell, the prophet Joshua had placed a severe, explicit curse on anyone who would dare to rebuild that specific city. Hiel completely ignores this ancient warning, and the text tells us exactly what it cost him. He laid the city's foundations at the cost of his firstborn son Abiram, and he set up its final gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub. It is a tragic, literal fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua son of Nun. It proves that God's warnings do not just expire, even when an entire society decides it's comfortable ignoring them.
Part 6. Practical life lessons. Let's look at how we can apply this.
And this brilliantly illustrates some vital practical takeaways for our own lives. First, we see the absolute danger of repeating past mistakes. Just as Hiel of Bethel willfully ignored Joshua's ancient warning and tragically lost his sons, king after king in this chapter walked in the identical sins of Jeroboam, completely ignoring the catastrophic results it brought to the guys who came before them. Second, we witness the inevitable fallout of poor leadership. When a leader like Elah gets drunk in Arza's house instead of leading, or when Zimri acts purely on bloody ambition, the entire nation is the one that suffers the consequences of civil war, violence, and chaos. Finally, this chapter shows us how unchecked moral decay escalates rapidly. Omri was worse than those before him, and his son Ahab was worse than Omri, treating past sins as trivial and literally importing Baal worship. When bad behavior isn't corrected, it doesn't just stay the same, it multiplies.
Which leaves us with this crucial question to reflect on. How can we identify and break cycles of destructive behavior in our own lives before they escalate? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.